Alright, hello. I'm going to walk you through my process of creating a night sky time lapse. So I've already created this video that kind of walks through the steps that I take to make it, but I didn't include any narration, so it might be a little difficult to tell what I'm doing. This video will hopefully clarify that for you. So first of all, you got to be up at night, and I'm not really much of a night person. I'm more of a morning person. So for me, I get up really early when I do it. Because I'm getting up for the day, you know, a little groggy at 3 in the morning, make myself a cup of coffee and get things kick-started. As I'm making my coffee, I start to gather up my equipment. So what you want to gather up here is I've got a tripod that is a must. I've got a DSLR camera, and you don't necessarily need a DSLR, but you need a camera that at least can use a remote. So this is a time-lapse remote, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a little bit, but you need to be able to use it remote. You need a fairly large SD card because you're going to be taking lots of photos when you're making time lapses. And if you're doing a night sky time lapse, you need to have a fairly wide shooting lens. This lens right here is adjustable, 18 millimeters to 200 millimeters, and I shoot at 200 millimeters. Then you're going to need to get your settings on your camera set up correctly. These are the settings that I use. I've got my ISO set to 1600. 1600 is a fairly high ISO, but the higher the ISO, the more light your camera picks up. So but it's a balancing act, because if your ISO is too high, then your images become really grainy and they just don't look as sharp. 1600 seems to be the sweet spot on my camera for picking this up. Now all these settings, the ISO, the f-stop, and the shutter speed, they all have to be kind of balanced together. So if you change one, chances are you're going to have to change the others as well. I shoot at my f-stop at the lowest number that this lens can shoot at, which is 3.5. I've read that even shooting at like 2.5 or 2.8 is good for night sky shots, but again, my lens does not go that low. It's a balancing act. Again, the higher your f-stop, the more stuff that's in focus, but the higher the f-stop, the less light is let into the camera. So again, a balancing act. Shutter speed is very important, which is this setting over here. What this 25 and the quotation mark over here means is that this is a 25-second shutter speed, meaning my shutter is open for 25 seconds. So whenever I take a picture on these settings, the shutter is open for 25 seconds. 25 seconds of light gets into the camera, and you need a long shutter speed at night to pick up those stars. Some people shoot at 30. You can leave it open even for like a half hour at a time. I know some people do, but again, these are the settings that I like to use. This is my time-lapse remote, and you can see I'm setting it up to shoot at an interval of every 2 minutes. It's going to take a photo. The closer the time is on this, so if I could do it at like 30 seconds or a minute, the more images you're going to need to make it look like it's moving in your time-lapse. This is kind of a balancing act as well, because by having a high ISO and by having a 25-second shutter speed, the camera has to do a lot of processing, and it takes it about a minute to process each photo. So I found that at night, 2 minutes interval is a pretty good spot to be. Okay, after you get everything set up, obviously you got to run outside and you got to get your camera set up. You want to point your camera up at the sky at whatever stars you want to look at. You might also want to consider what's in the background, or what. So I have some trees in mind. You might just want a shot of complete stars. That's cool, but some people like to have like maybe an old building or something in there. Just depends on what you're going. Then you want to shift your lens to manual focus, and I shoot on infinite focus just to make sure I get everything into view. So you don't want to have it on autofocus, because it might focus on different objects each time it takes a photo, and that would mess up your time lapse. Of course, don't forget to remove the lens cap. And then with this handy time-lapse remote, all you have to do is hit start, and then it will just continuously, I have it set up to just continuously take photos until I come out and stop it. The time-lapse that you'll see at the end of this video was taken over about a 45-minute period. Once you've taken all your photos, then you've got to compile them. So what I like to do is I like to take them and put them in their own folder, anything that I'm going to use for a time-lapse. This just makes it easier for me. Once you get all your images that you want to use in your photo, you open up your image editing or video editing tool. I use Premiere Elements. It's a nice, simple, fairly affordable program. You got to import your files, which is what I'm doing here. So I'm importing all of my photos, and I have it set up so they're in alphabetical order. Drag them all down, and then what you have to do is this. I'm going to pause it here so I can talk about this for a second. What I'm doing is I'm changing the duration that each picture shows. In this case, I found for shooting time lapses that doing 1/100th of a second is the optimal time to get a nice, quick moving, fluid time lapse. Now you could play around with this, and different people have, for different purposes, set different time intervals. But just as a default, I do 1/100th of a second. And you can see that I changed it from about about 4 minutes of photos down to like about 5 seconds. And then it's giving me a preview, and I think, okay, that looks all right. And then I go ahead and I export and share. Now, I usually just export in 1080p, but the nice thing about shooting with a DSLR is if you want to, you could even shoot 4K time lapses. They just take a lot longer to process and are much bigger files. So now it's processed, it's complete, and then we get to enjoy our time lapse. And so you can see a nice fluid time lapse of the stars moving. It happened to be a fairly moist morning, so my lens starts to fog up at the end. But outside of that, it turned out great. And if you did it for a longer period of time, you could really get some nice motion on your stars. So I hope that helps. I hope you have a clear idea of how to create your own time lapse. And just for fun, I'll make sure that I have the time lapse here for you to watch again. So thanks for watching.